Once again, welcome to Azure Data Bricks session. So so from today will be from today will be learning about Azure Data Bricks. Starting with I just quickly glance through the syllabus that we're planning as part of Azure Data Bricks, and also we'll quickly run through a understand what is Azure Data Bricks, why it is so important, etc. And then we can look into the some of the internal details. All right. So to do that, so first thing we'll be discussing about the high level the Databricks architecture. So what exactly Databricks, right? What problem it solves, right? We have so far we learned about the data factory and how Databricks and data factory can work together to solve a problem. All right. So although discuss all those details we'll be discussing as part of this syllabus, and what are the some of the benefits when we have a data bricks and the background of data bricks. If you know already about the data bricks, the company that operates as a data bricks company, since it has it customized and tied up with Microsoft Azure as well, so it's called Azure Databricks. Okay, so anyhow, we are going to discuss the in detail as part of the syllabus, and also some of the main concepts, right? So how exactly we are going to work with, what is interface, what is workspace, right? How the data going to be managed in Databricks, and what are the different sources that we can bring to here, right? And what exactly the compute, right? What exactly the compute cluster, basically what is cluster, what is compute, and all the some of the important concepts related to Databricks we are going to learn. Okay, and how do we create a job, and how do we create a workflows, and how do we manage the data in terms of tables, views, and also the meta store. So all the stuff we're going to discuss, all the stuff we're going to discuss about, learn more about the data bricks. Okay, so once done, then we'll move to the different clusters. Okay, so what is cluster? We already dealt with cluster in our previous class when we are doing with data factory. We know what is integration runtime, and when we are doing in mapping data flow to do a debug mode, we need to start a cluster, right? So we already touched upon what is cluster, so we are going to get into more granular level in terms of how a cluster works, right? And also we're going to use it, how we can use it in our analytics purpose, right? So we're going to discuss that as well. And of course we'll create our own cluster required for our practice and our to learn in this training session, right? And also you there is a new term you've been noticed, notebook, right? So far we don't know what is notebook, right? So this is going to be a new term, notebook. You will be get used to that term with our future set of classes, right? So and also we will learn quick to what is this notebook all about, right? Why do you need a notebook? What are the some of the options available, and how you can use that, and how you can write your own analytic commands, and how you process that. So all the stuff you're going to learn it. And then some of the Databricks utilities. So Databricks already gives you a bunch of utilities and libraries already available. For example, one could be data DB utils, right? And it has plenty of options for you to play with the data. Okay, So now we're going to deep dive into the DB utilities packages, libraries, and then how that can be used in your with some of the real time examples. We can touch upon that as well. Okay. So some of the stuff stay straightforward, some of the stuff are not straightforward. If you are looking at the my agenda and you have any questions, just hold for some now. Okay. For example, see mount point. So what is mount point? If you already know, it's well and good. But if you don't know, just write that question and keep it ready with somewhere. Okay. So as we move progress, we are going to discuss in detail about all these. What is mount point? Why it is required? Right? How to create a mount point to connect to different sources. So all the stuff we're going to discuss. Okay, and finally the variables and widget types. Right? So you this is another new word, widget types. Okay, so what is widget, how to create a widget, and how do we pass how do we declare variables and pass to the notebook as a parameter, right? So we know how to pass a parameter to a pipeline, to a data set, to a linked set and all, right? Similarly, as at notebook level, how do we how do we create widgets, and how do we accept input values, and how do we pass to the um, rest of the processing. So all these stuffs we are going to discuss. And then we also need to integrate with the Azure Blob Storage and ADLS, right. So this Databricks, this cannot be an independent and I know siloed process. You have to integrate with other Azure services, for example, a Blob service or storage or ADLS, right. And of course the Azure Data Factory pipeline also, right. So once you create a notebook, how this notebook can be integrated with the pipeline, right. I wanted to execute this notebook as part of my ADF pipeline, right. So you how to do that, we will discuss those as well. And then once we some of the services we already know, storage account we know, key vault service we discussed already. Okay. And some of them we are going to discuss deep dive into this as part of this session. For example, if you see to read from different format files, different multiple files, and also writing to a data frame. Right? What is a data frame? This is again a new word, right? So we were going to deep dive into how to create a data frame. What is the structure of the data frame? Right? So all the stuff we're going to discuss, and of course reading the files from multiple storage services, right? How do we integrate with Databricks, with other services? What are the different prerequisites and authentications required? All the stuff we're going to discuss. And finally the SQL database. Without SQL nothing works, right? So so we in our previous classes we discussed how the data we can bring and then load to data SQL database, creating tables, creating stored procs and all. So here also we will be, when we read the files from coming from multiple files reading and writing, how do we write to the SQL database, and how do we create tables? Of course tables we know, but how do we populate the data to using a notebook, using PySpark, right? So that's more important. We'll do that. And then we'll reading multiple, of course these are all part of the syllabus we'll be covering. Okay. And also we learned about the Parquet ORC Avro files in Azure Data Factory. So similarly we will also deal with some of those file formats when we creating a data frames and all. Okay. And also we'll install some of the libraries required for different processing. Okay. So if we don't go in the advanced kind of libraries, we'll just stick to the simple libraries, just to make sure to understanding how you can integrate how you can install a library into your workspace. Okay, so that's the one. And of course the next one would be on PySpark. Okay. So PySpark, so what is Spark? right? And what is PySpark? What is how it is different than so far whatever we are doing? What are the some of the benefits, right? And what are the some of the internals of Spark? All the going to discuss along with the architecture internals, right? So how exactly the processing happens background. See, it's very important you know the internals, right? See the coding can be done by anyone, right? But unless you know the internals, how we given, if I given 100 plus hundreds, how the compute cluster going to calculate 100 plus 100, you need to know that, right? Without knowing, just writing code doesn't make any sense. So we will be spending some time in terms of understanding the internals, right? And when you're dealing with the big files and when we get into performance issues, how do you resolve those performance, right? What are some of the best practices? All right. So now RDD, what is RDD? This is another new term. Okay. So if you don't know, just keep a write off this word as well. RDD. So how do we? What is RDD? What is the internal structure of RDD and how it behaves? All the stuff we are going to discuss. Okay. So one of the property of RDD is lazy evaluation. So what is lazy evaluation? Right. So all those things we are going to discuss as part of this syllabus, and also some of the transformations, right? So without transformation nothing works. So you see the objective is we need to connect the different sources of data and bring them and then transform the data in such a way that that can be used by multiple people, right? So without transformation nothing works. We cannot, if the data can be used as is in a raw format, it's not a we cannot reuse it basically, right? So that is where the transformations come into picture. And these transformations we already discussed in as part of our mapping data flow, uh, some of them, and some of them going to be new, which we are going to discuss as part of this, right? For example, see, what is flat map? How do you create a map partition, right? What is union we already know, right? Distinct, join, partitions, right? So going forward you will be hearing more about partitions, right? So if you really, if you are already know what is partition and you had somewhere or read somewhere, I would like to go back and deep dive into what is a partition and what are the benefits of partitions. Because when you see with the when you deal with the big data, partition is going to play a major role, right? And for example, if I'm getting a billion records from my source and nobody process the billion records at one shot, right? That's not the ideal situation. So we need to partition the data and then divide the data into more chunks and then process the chunks in a parallel way, right? So how that partition happens and all, we're going to discuss that. And finally the Spark SQL, right? So how do you deal with relational data, right? So we know SQL statements, how to write in a SQL database. For example, we know, okay, we created a table, we have inserted some data, we have updated some data, deleted some data, but how that can be done using a Spark SQL? Because here we are using different interface altogether. We are not using the SQL database interface over here. We need to execute SQL commands using the Databricks notebook, right? So we need to talk in the same language that the Databricks can understand. Okay. So now how do we create those, and what are the different APIs available in the SQL side and some of the internals of SQL, right? So all the transformations, how do you sort data, how do you select, how do you use different joins and all, we are going to discuss that. Okay. And finally we can create our own functions, right? Of course there are a rich of SQL functions are available, right? But if you want to create your own user defined function, you can create your own function as well. Okay. So all the stuff as part of SQL we're going to discuss. And also we are also going to discuss about delta lake. So what is delta lake? Right, this is again another new concept, okay, in Azure Databricks. We're going to deep dive into that as well. So what is the delta format? What are the some of the benefits? Why it's evolving? All right. And then Databricks integration with Data Factory. So finally this has come, right? So you have to integrate with this the Data Factory. There is no other way. Okay. So we're going to do that as well. All right. So that's just to give you an idea of what's coming up over the next few days, and trying to understand the syllabus uh, at a high level. Okay. So any questions so far?
Hi, sir.
Yeah.
So do I need anything Spark knowledge before I continue this course?
No. So you're not going to write any Spark programs here, right? So we are going to use the available APIs to communicate with the Spark.
Okay. So I didn't attend any ADF classes. So is there anything I need to first complete that one, or can I continue without ADF?
You can continue as well. Okay, these two are different. Of course, they all work together to solve the same problem, but they do two are two different independent. I would say independent modules. Okay, so to learn one, there is absolutely nothing is mandatory. The other thing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so quickly moving to the just there is an announcement. So just fill up this subscription form. Okay, so that the team will be in contact with you. Okay, I just put that uh, URL in the chart. Go and just click on that and fill up that students enrollment. Okay, so that's an announcement from the organization. Okay, now let's quickly move and try to understand more what exactly Azure Data Bricks. Any more questions, guys, before I move on? Sorry, I didn't ask this question. All right. So,
Sir,
yeah, go ahead.
sir, in this course, Python and PySpark also included.
Right. Not Python. We are not going to cover Python as part of this course. So when I say PySpark, so interacting using Python to interact with the Spark. That is called a PySpark. So there are rich available APIs are available. So we'll be using those APIs to interact with Spark.
Sir, notebooks, in notebooks we have. we have to use Python, right? So,
Correct. Yeah. So see some of the many of them we are going to use APIs, the Python APIs, right? So for example, let's say you want to write a loop, right? So loop, anyhow you need to know Python, but you need to call an API which internally does that looping and everything. You just need to pass the right values to that, right? For that you don't need to learn Python, right? So that's what I'm trying to differentiate.
okay.
So if you already know some of the any of the programming language, if you're already familiar with this objective oriented oops concepts and all, it's a well and good. It's going to be enhancing your knowledge, right? But the same task can be done using a simple library as well, API, simple API as well.
I don't know the Python actually. It's fine.
Okay. Yeah, even if you're not familiar with Python, that is okay, as long as you understand that API concepts and you're able to do that.
Okay. Sir, in a real time, how we will use that?
What do
Hello.
you mean by real time?
Sir, in real everyone in our company asking PySpark and Python.
Hmm. Correct.
Uh,
So you start with PySpark calling those APIs in your program, and eventually, if you had to get into the Python, some of the basics of the Python, right? So there is no short way to do that, right? You have to become a data engineer with PySpark. You have to know Python as well, right? But yeah, at the stage one, you need no need over the period, over the depending on the use case and all, you can eventually you can learn over that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So let me quickly go into presentation. All right. So Azure Data Bricks. What is Azure Data Bricks? Right. So before we get into know what is Azure Data Bricks, what is Data Bricks first? Right. So now when you look at the big data evolution happened when 2009 10. So we had a Google had come up with a concept of processing a big data they are using for their internal projects and all, is a kind of a map reduce, right? So you would have had the term called map reduce. Basically, map reduce is a program that uses the to process the big data. Until that, there was nothing to process the big data. There were no sophisticated engines are available to process the big data. So Google was the first time came up with this map reduce concept in around 8 9 10 at that point of time. Okay, so now what it does is basically it uses the commodity hardware, right? So if you see, Google has a huge data center. They have a hundreds and thousands of these compute clusters, right? They're maintaining, and it uses it's very cheap hardware. Okay, so that by assuming that at any point of time any of those hardware fails, you can replace with another one. Okay, so that's where the big data processing evolution started. But over the period when the evolving, the big data is evolving, the data is becoming Big data is becoming a more cornerstone kind of for every enterprise to process the data, and the data is becoming humongous, right? With the social media and all, the data creation of and the creation of data is becoming increased and evolving. But some of the shortfalls of MapReduce was it does processing, and it distributes the data. It distributes the data into um multiple workers in the cluster, and then it does a lot of redundancy of data to make sure even one of the hardware fails, the other one has the data. And then once the processing it instructs each of the worker what to do, and then at the end it collects all the information and um, gives you the output. That's how the map reduce works, right? But there are some shortfalls with that, as you know, it's not a scale it up, and it's kind of a batch processing, right? But the industry ask is, we wanted to process real time, we wanted to do the streaming, right? You would have seen the recent IPL streaming and all, right? There are many OTT platforms which they offer streaming analytics, right? So those kind of use cases and those kind of problems we cannot solve with the MapReduce. Okay, so that is where Apache Spark has come into picture. So Apache Spark again is a analytics platform optimized for big data processing. Okay, it does only big data processing. That's it. Okay, so what does it big data processing? We'll come to know in a while. Okay, but at Apache Spark is another big data processing engine, which is uh, created to benefit some of the shortfalls of MapReduce program. Okay, now Apache Spark is Spark was real Spark was the original name, and then later the project got outsourced, open sourced it with Apache. It has the founders got tied up with Apache Foundation, and then they open sourced the project to Apache Foundation. That's why it's called Apache Spark. Okay, still it is one of the um, leading uh, leading and trending topic in big data processing. And when you're dealing with big data, everybody has to know of this word called what is Spark. Okay, so now these bunch of guys from Berkeley University, they have found that, right? Now they had come out and created another company called Data Bricks. Okay, so what is Data Bricks? Data Bricks nothing but it provides you a one-click setup to streamline the workflows, everything in a one-click way of thing. Okay, so you need not break. For example, you want to do an analytic project, you don't want to break your head to identify the compute and identify the resources required to do that, and the clustering management and all the stuff. You need not break your head to do that. Databricks as a company takes care of all that. All right, so now without Databricks you want to do, you can do that as well, since the Apache Spark is available as a open source project. You can download and you can manage on your own, right? So now what is Databricks is? Databricks is completely managed service for Apache Spark. Okay, and this is again started around 2011-12, and now it's kind of a $50 billion company. Okay, you can imagine the evaluation. All right. Now, as I said, it's a one-click solution it's a managed one-click solution for Apache Spark Databricks. All right. So it has unified set of tools, for building, deploying, sharing, maintaining enterprise grade data solutions at scale. Okay, so that's about briefly about Databricks. Now, why it is called Azure Databricks is since Databricks has partnered with multiple cloud providers. For example, it has partnered with Microsoft, so it's called Azure Databricks. It also partnered with AWS. It also partnered with GCP. Okay, so across the all three vendors, you can find Databricks. Okay, so now what is the Databricks is corely an engine. It internally uses the cloud providers, uh, cloud providers storage and compute service to create um, the Spark engine. Okay, so that's briefly about to understand what is uh, Apache's. I mean, what is the Azure Databricks? Okay, so now where it will fit into, right? So you know what is Azure Databricks, and you might be wondering where does it fit into my regular day work, right? In an enterprise, where does it fit into? Okay, so now if you see on the left side, we have the data engineering, right? The ADF part we already done, right? There is a data scientist, data engineering, the lines of businesses, they are using different stuff, right? And there are many other things. There are social media and all the stuff is coming out. Now, as a Databricks, as an analytics process engine, it takes care of, it connects to the different sources. For example, if you see on the bottom, the blob storage, the lake storage, and the SQL warehouse storages, and also on the real time Kafka and Hadoop storage, everything it has connectors to get the data and then process and transform the data using Databricks workflows, Databricks workspaces, runtime, and Databricks IO, as well as the different serverless services that offers as a package. Okay, so once the processing happens through Databricks, the data can be consumed by the different applications. For example, AML use cases, streaming, or the warehousing, or you want to create a Power BI report, anything and everything you can do out of that. All right. I just want to take a minute of this diagram for you to understand where Databricks will fit into in a general analytics use case. Okay, this is very important, guys. If you don't know where to use Databricks, it's no matter how good in your PySpark and all doesn't take you anywhere unless you know what is the real use case of Databricks. Okay, and as you start from the data engineer and then you go within your evolve in your organization, when you're designing a solution, when you're designing some analytic workload, you should be knowing where and when you can use the data bricks. Okay, because clients are looking for you. Okay, so it's very important for you to understand. Just take a minute to understand this diagram. Okay, so any questions so far before I move on to? All right. Okay, so I think in the chart I have posted this link. So go and subscribe this one. It's very important for the training organization to track certain things. Okay, spend few minutes after this session and complete that one. All right, guys. Okay, so now what are the different scenarios where I can use Azure Data Bricks? Okay, Now let's see. As I said, you as a business, you will be dealing with multiple things, right? So you may be some business apps. For example, you're dealing with some Salesforce data. You're dealing with some Oracle apps. You're dealing with some any SaaS application, right? So you need a Azure Data Factory to for data movement and pipeline orchestration, right? And you also as an enterprise, you are not restricted to just use your business applications. You might be using some custom apps, you might be using some IoT devices. There must be some data coming over sensors, right? You are such a big organization, and the data, the diversified sources are humongous sources of data you have, right? So in that cases, you might be using Kafka, you might be using some event hub, IoT hubs, etc., as part of your analytics strategy, right? So those cases, you will bring the data from all these sources to a blob storage, and then from the blob storage, you can see the data bricks will come into play to transform the data in a such a way that can be used by machine learning and other purposes, right? So you can see after the processing data, you can some of the AI ML use cases, they can directly interact with the data, and the data can be persisted to the respective databases. For example, let's say Cosmos or SQL database or the warehouse, wherever, depending on the requirement, you can persist the data, and from there, the at the right side, you can see the consumers can use those data for their analytics purpose. For example, someone might be running a predictive model, someone might be running a deep learning model, right, on top of the data that's available, and then using it into maybe someone might be running a report, or someone might be running a Power BI dashboard, so on and so forth. The use cases are humongous, right? As long as the data is readily available, the use cases are humongous. And as a as a mandate, we need to be ready with the data to be consumed by others. Okay, so this could be a scenario where you need a data bricks, right? Only data factory will not solve this problem. Okay, so now quickly learn about what is Apache Spark, right? As I said, Apache Spark is a big data processing engine, right? Which is takes care of your streaming and relational data, machine learning, as well as a complex kind of a graph structure data as well. It has a capability of processing all the variety of data. Okay, it's very important, guys. So if you see, for example, let's say you are dealing with the relational data. Okay, you have a Spark SQL and data frames to process the data using Spark. Let's say you want to do a streaming, right? Maybe some video analytics or some OTT platform, you want to do the streaming, right? So streaming, Spark can do the streaming as well using the rich APIs. Now machine learning, right? As we shown in the previous slide, you can write some machine learning algorithms as well, right? The Spark can do that. And even further, the complex data structure is graph. So let's say you have some graph data is coming out. How do you process the data? You can use the Spark can support that as well. So if you see the ecosystem, it's spread across the complete packaged, it's a packaged solution for all your big data processing. When I say big data, it can be relational, non-relational, graph, streaming, anything. I can't think of anything that cannot do Spark. All right, and there is an underlying. You can see the rich, the core APIs are available. So originally, Spark was written in Scala. Scala is another programming language, okay, which is close to Java. Okay, it's not a 100% Java. It's kind of a about 60 to 70% of Java. If you know Java, you can write in Scala also. Okay, but now not many people are who knows Java and Scala like you and me. Even I don't know what is Scala, how to write a program in Scala. Even I don't know, not much familiar with Java as well, right? So, and people who and like people like you and me who doesn't have exposure to Scala, Java, right? So it now later they have added Python as well, Python and R. So if you know, R is basically another language to do the statistical analysis. All right, and Python, you know, one of the industry leading at this point, industry leading programming language. Okay, so it supports the APIs. The core APIs are developed in four languages. Okay, so if somebody knows Java, they can work with Spark. If somebody knows Scala, they can work with Spark. If somebody knows Python, they can work with Scala, and they can somebody knows R, they can work with Scala. Okay, and these four pillars gives you a rich APIs. You see the core APIs. The core API has been supported by all these four languages. So you can run a Spark program any of the languages using these core APIs. Does sounds good so far?
Hello.
Yeah.
So, so this means that we have to learn any of these four languages.
No, that's what not what I mean is, so it has the support of these four languages. Okay,
Okay.
and you will be interacting with the Spark using those core APIs. So these
Mhm.
four, there are APIs are available in these four languages. So based on your
Okay.
need and your comfortable level, you can use any of those APIs to interact with the Spark.
Okay.
And as part of this course, we'll be doing with the PySpark, right? So what is PySpark basically? Python plus Spark, right? Using Python APIs, how do we work with Spark is what we are going to continue in the rest of this course. Java, Scala, and R are out of syllabus. Okay.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah. Any other question, guys? See, these are the fundamentals, and it's very important for you to stamp these concepts in your mind, so that you will not uh, again tomorrow you will not be surprised that what is Spark and what is Python and what is streaming. You will not be again in a blank space when we move into the next cassettes. It's very very important, these words and these concepts. Okay, so now let's some of the before I move into concepts, I just want to quickly go to Azure portal. So now if you see, you can type it over here, or you can see as part of services, Azure Data Bricks is available. Okay. So now if you click on that, see right now nothing is available. Okay. So now you can see when you just click on that, unlock insights from all your data and build artificial intelligence solutions with Azure Data Bricks. Set up your Apache Spark environment in minutes, auto scale, and collaborate on shared projects in an interactive workspaces. So if you see, the underlying engine is Apache Spark. Okay. So what this service does is, this service is that basically it creates an environment in just a minutes. Without this, if you want to set up a cluster, it takes a days and weeks or months sometimes. Okay, but without any hassle free, you can use the Azure Data Bricks service and you can create your cluster and start one, and you start your work even a minute. In the next minute, you can start working. Okay, so that's the beauty of this service. Now you can see here, you can create and you can give the subscription and all other stuff that we know already, right? So you can see subscription, resource group, workspace name, and the region you want to deploy, all the stuff you can do. Okay, so you can see pricing strategy. Okay, so now one important thing to remember here is um, the Databricks service, we are going to use it through Azure portal or not free. Okay, the moment you create a workspace and the moment you work, you are going to be charged. Though you're using, if you're using even a free tier account, it's going to be charged. It's not a free. Okay, this is an important announcement I want to make. Even by mistake, if you create and work on this, it's going to be charged on your credit card. Okay, be careful. So now what? How do we do this? How do we proceed this training without that? Right. So what happens is, so Databricks as a company, you can. I'll just quickly go on. Right. So Databricks as a company. So this is the URL of Databricks. Okay, and go through that in detail. Okay, so it's a company. You can see partners, customer, all the stuff. You see the cloud partners. It supports all the cloud, AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. Okay, so now what happens is here, as part of their learning, and strategy, they are giving a community edition for us, for you and me to learn and practice. Okay, so what does it mean? So when you see community.cloud.databricks.com, so this is the community edition, which is completely free. So there is no time limit, nothing. Like Microsoft Azure, it has 30 days of validity, but here there is nothing. You can create your own account and you can work across. Okay, it will not charge you anything. It's not ask you any payment or anything. Okay, so I would highly recommend everyone to leverage this one. Okay, so leverage this one and create your own account. Okay, and I would expect you to do by today, so that when you come to tomorrow, we're going to work on this. All right, guys. So since I'm a community cloud.databricks.com, if you want, I can pass on this chart. Create the account today itself. Okay, so go through here and create your own account, and we'll be using all these this community edition in our day-to-day activities across this training. Okay, now you see, this is where we can create our notebook, table, cluster, right? So we are going to discuss in detail what is notebook, what is table, what is cluster, right? What is workspace, right? And what is compute and what workflow, right? So all the stuff we're going to discuss in detail in our coming classes. Okay. Now for you to understand, you need a let's see. I wanted to do a simple math. I want to calculate 100 plus 200. Right? I want to do it in a simple. You can see by default it's a Python, but you can change based on your requirement. You can change this to Java or Scala as well. Okay, by default it's a Python. So go to settings. You can change the default language. Okay, so you can see notebook, email, preferred language, everything you can see. You can change it over here. Okay. Now go back. Okay, I simply want to run a 10 plus 10. Anything, right? I simply want to do this calculation. Now let's run. Now see, as soon as I plan to run, it is asking to attach a cluster, right? If you remember when we are doing mapping data flows in Azure Data Factory, and whenever we plan to run in debug mode and wanted to see the data in a debug mode, it always asks you to turn on debug mode on and attach a cluster. They attach an integration runtime cluster, right? So what is that integration runtime cluster? Is nothing but your compute infrastructure behind the scenes that these services uses to do all the computations and calculations. Similarly, for everything, whatever you do, notebook is nothing. It's just a notebook. If you don't attach any cluster, it is nothing. It's as like as a blank, right? So you can see the cluster. It's asking to install attach a cluster, right? So now what is the cluster? Yes, at high level, I spoke to you, but we are going to discuss deep dive into in our coming classes. You can see create a new cluster over here, and as I mentioned, we are using a community edition, right? So free 15 GB memory is what is available to us. That means the compute infrastructure which is having up to 15 GB of memory is only available to us as a community edition user. Your cluster will automatically terminate after an idle period of 1 or 2 hours. Okay, so that's a given, and that's as per their standard. Now you can see workers and driver. So what is worker, what is driver? So these are the Spark internals. Okay, we are going to deep dive. Okay, and you can see the uh, cluster configuration and the runtime that is going to use in your as a computation. Okay, so and Databricks, of course, there are different runtimes, and their runtimes they change very often, and you can see different runtimes uh, being used uh, in our cluster. Okay.
Sir, one doubt.
Mhm.
Sir, are these runtimes specific to the jobs that we are running?
Runtimes are specific to the cluster.
Okay.
Okay, let's say that right now 1 to 12.2 LTS is what the default one, right? There also 13 is available, 13.1 is a beta version is also available. Now let's say that as part of your work, you wanted to, you know that in 13.1 there is some new features is coming up, and you wanted to test some of these features, right? So what you can do is you can jump into 13.1, you can use it. but that's not a standard version at this point. It's kind of beta version. You see that beta, right? So
Yes.
right. So if you have any specific requirement, you can go back. You can there is a backward compatibility available. You can go back and use those specific runtimes if you know in detail. Otherwise, let's see, leave the default one.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So that's about the data bricks. Okay. So I hope you got to know what is data bricks and little bit about Spark and how the Databricks got created, the company got created, and what is Azure Databricks, and what are the some of the use cases of Azure Databricks in your day-to-day real-time use cases, right? When do you use this Azure Databricks, right? So at least you got some idea. Okay, and with that we are going to discuss in detail more in terms of what is Spark and what is within this what is notebook, what is cluster, how to create a cluster, all the stuff we're going to discuss in our next classes. Okay, I would highly recommend everyone to go and create a community account immediately today after this class so that we are going to use it from tomorrow onwards. All right. That's all from my side for today. Any questions or anything before we wrap it up? Yeah, go ahead, Hanumant.
Sir, actually, this was very clear, sir. So just I was having like since we were thinking like we need to have paid versions for this, but since you said that community edition, so
Yeah,
I think we can have very good hands-on. So that would be benefiting all of us.
absolutely. See, that's a huge investment Databricks is doing on you and me, right? So if
Yes,
you
sir.
if you if you can't leverage that opportunity, it's our fault. It's not the Databricks fault, right? So it's
Yes, sir.
anybody with a little background, and we can do that hands-on and we can play with that. There is no restriction. Okay, so go and create immediately, and from tomorrow onwards, we are going to rock using the community edition. All right, so we are 1 minute. Any last one or two questions before we wrap it up? All right, guys. So I think it was a good session today. Good start. Okay, and let's keep the keep the arrow high, and we were going to have an interesting and fun-filled sessions ahead. All right. So from tomorrow again, we will regroup and we'll we'll start our next agenda. Okay. As I said, create those community edition accounts and keep it ready. And from tomorrow, we are going to use it with a good space. Okay, and and one important is, as I said, some of the um, terms and the jargons you might be hearing first time or you already know. Don't worry, we are going to deep dive in detail about what is data frame, what is cluster, and what is runtime, and what is notebook. All the stuff we are going to deep dive in further classes. Okay, so if you have any questions over there, just keep a note and you can ask in the relevant sessions. All right. Have a good day, everybody. Talk to you soon tomorrow.